I do think we raised the alarm that this is a president who is willing to have a mid-decade redistricting entirely for his own benefit, not for the benefit of the country, not even for the benefit of his party. It's really for his benefit. That's really shocking.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Texas State Senator Sarah Eckhardt, who you heard up top. She is one of the leading progressive voices in the Texas Legislature and was one of the Democratic legislators who temporarily left the state in August in an attempt to block a congressional redistricting plan ordered by President Donald Trump. We talked about that fight, which set off a chain reaction in other states. We also talked more broadly about Texas state politics and the ways Eckhardt thinks the state's Republican majority is overreaching and maybe creating opportunities for candidates on the left. That's coming up. Later in the Arts and Culture segment, we'll look at a roots music and alternative culture festival celebrating its 30th and possibly final year in North Carolina. But first, it's time for the weekly news roundup. This week, ICE deports a Georgia journalist, an interesting primary battle takes shape in Memphis, and the Supreme Court schedules a case that could reshape southern congressional maps once again. Mario Guevara entered the United States legally in 2004 on a visa from El Salvador. The next year, he applied for asylum, citing threats from violent militias in his home country. He has lived in the Atlanta area for the past 20 years. Over time, he began working as an independent reporter, covering issues affecting the region's growing Latino population. His website, noticiasmg.com, and social media channels have tens of thousands of followers. Guevara became a familiar face in the Atlanta media, and this year had been especially active covering the local actions of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He has won regional journalism awards, including an Emmy. On June 14th, he was covering a protest against ICE just outside Atlanta when he was arrested by local police, despite clearly identifying himself as a member of the press. Those charges for interfering with law enforcement were quickly dismissed, but while he was being held, he was transferred to the custody of ICE, who immediately placed him into deportation proceedings, reopening a case that had been closed in 2012. Guevara's attorneys maintain he had been here living and working legally for the past 13 years. He has an application pending for permanent legal residency sponsored by his adult son, a U.S. citizen. Guevara's friends and supporters allege that he was actually targeted for his journalistic work, a suspicion shared by civil rights and First Amendment advocacy groups. Catherine Jacobson of the Committee to Protect Journalists, which advocates for freedom of the press globally, said, quote, Mario Guevara's deportation is a troubling sign of the deteriorating freedom of the press under the Trump administration. Guevara was first detained in retaliation for his reporting, and throughout his prolonged detention, the government argued that he was being held because his live streaming activity posed a danger to law enforcement activity, unquote. Others raising concerns included the National Association of Hispanic Journalists and the ACLU. The ACLU released a letter Guevara wrote while in ICE detention, in which he pleaded for the ability to remain in the United States. Life is not always fair, he wrote. If I am deported, I will leave with my head held high, because I am convinced it will be for doing my work as a journalist and not for committing crimes. He added, the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States says, with liberty and justice for all. Right now, that is a fallacy. They should add, except for immigrants. That appeal fell on deaf bureaucratic ears, and on October 3rd, Guevara was flown to El Salvador. In a short video he released on his arrival there, he pledged to continue his work, quote, twice as hard. In the meantime, the website he launched remains active in Atlanta, with other local reporters keeping it alive, so give it a look. Now to Memphis. It looks like the city is going to have a fascinating Democratic primary for its congressional seat next year. Last week, State Representative Justin Pearson announced he's running for the 9th Congressional District seat that has been held by Congressman Steve Cohen since 2006. Cohen is a generally well-regarded liberal and now the only Democrat left in Tennessee's 9-member congressional delegation. During the state's last redistricting after the 2020 census, the Republican-dominated legislature carved up what had been a Democratic-leaning district in Nashville, essentially stealing a seat. That left only the 9th district, which covers Memphis, a strongly Democratic city with a majority black population. Cohen is Tennessee's first Jewish congressman and is also the only white member of Congress of either party who represents a majority-minority district. He has faced down primary challenges from black candidates before, but he hasn't faced anyone like Pearson. Pearson is just 30 and is in his second term representing Memphis in the state legislature. But he gained outsized visibility for such a young officeholder during his first months in office in 2023 as one of the Tennessee Three, a trio of Democratic lawmakers who staged a brief protest on the floor of the State House over gun laws after the Covenant school shooting in Nashville. Pearson and State Representative Justin Jones of Nashville were both expelled by their Republican colleagues in an act of political hubris by the supermajority that brought international condemnation and made them political celebrities. Pearson was promptly reappointed to a seat, then reelected to it in a special election, and then reelected again in the regular 2024 election, which means people in Memphis have had a lot of exposure to him for somebody who's still a fairly fresh face. The race sets up an intergenerational contest, pitting the 76-year-old Cohen against a candidate less than half his age. When Pearson was born in 1995, Cohen had already been in the Tennessee State Senate for 13 years. In making his announcement, Pearson didn't directly criticize Cohen, but he suggested that he could provide more active representation. Quote, "It's not enough to just stop with the votes that you're casting," he said. "You've got to be a voice of your constituents and of your people, which is why you'll still see me at county commission and city council, school board meetings, and Memphis light, gas, and water meetings, because I'm a resident of this community. I want to see this place that I love improve on every level." Cohen also didn't mention Pearson by name in reacting to the announcement, referring to him only as, quote, "an ambitious young candidate. With your continued support, we will turn back this challenge in the Democratic primary and go on to work with the incoming Democratic House majority to put a stop to this runaway administration," Cohen said in a statement posted on social media. Pearson has the backing of the young Democratic activist David Hogg, who has founded a group called Leaders We Deserve, partly to challenge what he sees as complacent Democratic incumbents. He's committed $1 million to Pearson's campaign. The challenge comes against the backdrop of dissatisfaction among many younger progressives in particular, with what they see as the lack of forceful and focused opposition to Trump's agenda from Democratic leaders. If elected, Pearson would become one of the youngest members of Congress, and the first black representative from Tennessee in 20 years. He's also the second member of the Tennessee Three to seek federal office. Last year, State Representative Gloria Johnson from Knoxville, who barely survived an expulsion vote on the same day Pearson and Jones were expelled, was the Democratic challenger to Senator Marsha Blackburn. Blackburn won easily, taking 64% of the vote, the same as Trump in Tennessee last year. But if Pearson beats Cohen in the Democratic primary, he would have a much easier time in the general election. Memphis hasn't sent a Republican to Congress since 1972. But it is at least theoretically possible that the district Pearson and Cohen are running to represent could itself change before the 2026 election. That possibility arises from the Louisiana redistricting case that the U.S. Supreme Court will hear arguments in this week. We've talked about this case before. It arises from Louisiana's court-mandated redrawing of its congressional map, which was found to violate the Voting Rights Act because it underrepresented black voters. However, a group of white Louisiana citizens sued over the new map, arguing that drawing congressional districts to guarantee representation of racial minorities amounted to discrimination against the state's white racial majority. After hearing initial arguments last spring, the Supreme Court asked for further arguments from the two sides, which many observers took as a signal that the court could be ready to revisit the central remaining pillar of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. That landmark law guaranteeing racial equality in elections has over the past 60 years created a legal framework protecting racial minorities against having their voting power diminished or diluted. The Supreme Court itself affirmed it as recently as 2023 when it affirmed a court order for Alabama to draw a second black majority congressional district. But if the court's conservative majority uses the Louisiana case to restrict the use of racial metrics in setting district lines, or throws it out altogether, that could effectively free up state legislatures to draw new lines without regard to their racial impact. The court has already removed restrictions on partisan gerrymandering, saying states are free to draw districts to favor whatever political party they want. Because black voters since the civil rights era have voted overwhelmingly for Democrats, the restriction on breaking up black voting power has effectively protected at least some Democratic-leaning districts, even in the reddest states, like the 9th Congressional District in Memphis. Without that restriction, a state like Tennessee could break up the Memphis district into more Republican-friendly pieces. It's even possible that a Supreme Court ruling could come next spring in time for red states to race to make those changes before next November's election. There are currently 22 black members of Congress from the predominantly Republican southern states. They're all Democrats. It may not be mathematically possible for those state legislatures to convert all of those to Republican-leaning districts, but they could certainly put a big dent in that representation, which would probably result both in even fewer black elected officials from the South and even more conservatives. Okay, now we're to my interview with Sarah Eckhardt. She's a Democratic state senator representing Texas's 14th district, which covers part of Austin and its metro area. She's been in office since 2020 and was most recently reelected in 2024, without opposition since the Republican Party didn't even bother to field a candidate in the heavily liberal district. Before that, she was elected twice as county judge in Travis County, which is where Austin is. That's not a judicial position. County judges in Texas are the equivalent of county executives or county mayors in other states. She also served as Travis County Commissioner, and prior to that, as Assistant County Attorney. But her political lineage goes back much farther than that. Her father, Bob Eckhardt, was a major figure in Texas Democratic politics. He was a U.S. congressman who represented part of the Houston metro area for 14 years, from 1967 to 1981. And before that, he'd been a state representative. He was part of a group of Texas liberals who emerged in the 1950s in opposition to the pro-segregation conservatives who dominated the party. He was also one of the founders of the storied Texas Observer magazine and served as its political cartoonist. Sarah Eckhardt is one of the most outspoken progressive voices in the Texas legislature. She often clashes with the arch-conservative Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who presides over the state Senate. She was among the Democratic legislators who left the state in August in an ultimately unsuccessful attempt to block the redistricting plan adopted by Republicans to create more Republican-friendly congressional districts in the 2026 midterm election. Eckhardt is now considering a run for one of those Republican-leaning congressional seats next year. I visited her office in the Texas state capitol in Austin last week. We talked about all of that and where she sees the opportunity and the need to offer Texans a different model of leadership. So, Seth, let's go to the tape.
All right, Senator Eckhardt, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
To start with, I wanted to ask just a little bit about your background and your family history. Obviously, your father was in Congress for, I guess, most of your childhood, probably, while you were...
Yeah, a good part of it. He was there for about 14 years.
So what was that like growing up in, a literally political family? And what did you learn from him, both, I guess, in terms of principles and politics? And what about that led you to eventually want to do it yourself? Because I can imagine some people growing up in that circumstance would say, I don't want any part of this.
Well, there were two tracks running in my house at the same time. I'm the youngest by a long shot of a big family. So my dad was born in 1913. My mom was 18 years younger than him, born in 1931. So with him, you had this individual who was born in a Texas that doesn't exist any longer, that was radically changed by the oil and gas industry, and was a major factor in the New Deal. The progressive movement in Texas and the progressive intellectualism in Texas was a big thing. Now, my mom, born nearly 20 years later, was part of a academic and journalistic renaissance in Texas. She and her first husband was a novelist. The two of them both worked for Lyndon Johnson when he was a U.S. Senator. And then she sort of embodied this, a feminist revolution, while my dad really embodied kind of a labor and civil rights revolution.
And, what was your impression, I guess, as a kid of politics? Did it look noble? Did it look ugly? Did it look difficult? Like, I guess what either drew you to it or gave you reservations about it?
I'm the only one of the children, and there's 7 of us between my mom and my father. I'm the only one who went into politics, per se. So while it looked, from my child's perspective, dangerous, arduous, filled with gamesmanship, very high stakes, it also looked like a very noble pursuit. That what my parents were trying to do is find solutions that created the greatest good for the greatest number, which still seems like a very, very noble goal for, that seems like a very good livelihood.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, and obviously Texas politically has changed a lot, certainly from the time that your father was in office. Clearly there was the impact of the realignment after the civil rights movement, the Southern strategy, the shift of conservatives solidly to the Republican Party. But Texas, I feel like still, I think for kind of, like progressives and Democrats across the country, looks on paper like, well, it feels like it could be sort of more competitive than it ends up seeming after each election. And so what is your take on that? What is the position of the Democratic Party within Texas right now? And where are the opportunities for it? And, what are the obvious obstacles for it?
Texas is an interesting state. Texans have always considered themselves extremely independent. Every political scientist knows this about Texas. Half of the voting age population, the voting eligible population, does not go to the polls. On the best of days, bright, sunny, beautiful day, only half of the people who can show up. Also, we've made it really, really difficult to vote here. So from a Democrat's perspective, Texas is a sleeping giant. And also, I think that most Texans, no matter what party they consider themselves to belong to, if they consider themselves to belong to a party at all, don't like the idea of being told what to do. They don't like the idea of, quote, party discipline. And yet we're seeing a tremendous amount of discipline out of Texas Republicans. My theory is that even Texas Republicans are growing weary of the boot on their neck.
And so how does that play out at sort of the issue and policy level? Like, where do you what are the issues that you yourself are most focused on, but especially where do you think there's opportunities, maybe in issues where the supermajority is out of sync with with what Texans actually want?
There were 2 obvious issues during this last legislative session. One was our water infrastructure. We are a very thirsty state, very, very dry in the western half. And the area that I represent straddles the wet portion and the dry portion of the state of Texas. So that's an area of tremendous bipartisan support. But even there, you saw a a minority faction in the Republican Party unwilling to give much of our financial wealth to actually solve the problem. And mostly that's because they would prefer to hold it as a patronage system and only dole out those dollars to the loyal and withhold them from the disloyal. We're seeing something similar in tax policy, where we really do need to look hard at our tax policy in the state of Texas. And I think there's a bipartisan belief that our taxing policy isn't really fair. It's almost entirely sales tax and property tax. And most people feel the property tax really keenly. It's because we don't have an income tax. And most people don't feel, although it's true, that our sales tax actually has gone up more than our property tax. So I think that we have some bipartisan concerns, but we've lost the muscle for looking for bipartisan solutions. So unfortunately, we end up with short-term, very politicized solutions that are assigned by Republican leadership to a faithful Republican legislature.
What approach do you take when it comes to, I think for representatives who are in a minority, there's always this push and pull between wanting or needing to be sort of like the voice standing up and saying, like, no, this is wrong. And I know, like, you haven't been shy about tangling with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. But then also looking for ways on specific bills and policies, to build relationships or to, make a small difference in some bill or something. How do you balance those things?
It's a difficult balance because we are really, I have to say, it's a small number of Republicans at the very, very top who are practicing this type of hyper-politicized leadership, not very interested in policy at all, very short-term outlook. What's in it for me? How can I maintain power? What friends do I need to reward? What enemies do I need to shut up? That's really the playbook here. And more, since they've marginalized the Democrats so hard, they're actually looking at what enemies in their own party they need to shut up. And so this is getting pretty dicey inside the halls of the legislature. If I've got a good bill or a good amendment to a Republican bill, I need to go find a Republican who will quietly carry it, who will carry it for me and not mention that it was originally my idea. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they will get punished. But I must find a Republican because you can only mule a bill across the finish line with a Republican's name on it in the Texas Senate. So,
and how are those relationships? I mean, like, do you literally have to talk to Republicans secretly? Is it at that level?
Pretty much.
Anybody even sees you having lunch together, like, that's going to be a problem?
Yeah, pretty much. You got to meet in each other's offices and be very, very quiet about it. Yes.
So you just came through, obviously, this very tumultuous special session where the redistricting was the major focus, although obviously there were other things that came out of that as well. On the redistricting, was that a surprise to you that it actually, I mean, it had kind of been floating out there. And obviously, I believe when the special session was first called, that wasn't even the thing that was at the top of mind about it. When did it become evident to you that, they're really going to do this? And I guess, did it surprise you, or had the Democratic caucus kind of been bracing for this and expected it to happen?
It was not expected, and we, let's go back in time for a moment. During the regular session, President Trump took office just as our session was beginning. Then the session itself was very, very tumultuous just from a state standpoint. And while the Trump administration was unfolding, the legislature was unfolding at the same time. And so when Trump put out the word to his faithful, "You will redistrict for me," in order to preserve our position in the midterms, which is becoming more and more precarious by the day. It was not surprising that he wanted to shore up his power in advance of midterms where he was becoming increasingly unpopular. And I want to say, Texas did have the Tom DeLay mid-decade redistricting previously. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a surprise tactic. But I didn't think we would go that far that fast. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was remarkable to go that far that fast.
And so what position did that put you all in as the Democrats and figure, obviously your options for responding were somewhat limited, and I guess how quickly did you have to come together and figure out what you were going to do?
We had to move very, very quickly and exert some unity among the Democrats at lightning speed. The House was able to pull that off, and they all left the state. The Senate was not able to pull that off because 2 of the senators in the Democratic caucus refused to leave the state. Mm-hmm. So kudos to my House colleagues. I wish the Senate had been able to exert the same kind of unity. The Republicans had something that they used to their advantage that was absolutely repulsive. They used a flood in which 137 people died as a bait and switch to keep people in the building.
Basically to say, if you want to help here, if you want to vote to provide this aid, you have to be here, and then we're going to do this redistricting as well.
It was a repulsive maneuver to say, if you leave on redistricting, it's because you don't care about the victims of this flood. Mm-hmm. And then by the time the second special was over, first of all, we didn't use the full 30 days, which was interesting. And also the most far-reaching and useful bills on flooding were not even heard in the Texas Senate. As soon as the House had its quorum back, pretty much we passed the redistricting map, passed the absolute minimum in flood, and then Siney died, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. leaving really important bills that would have had a really positive effect on Texas in emergency management, unheard.
So how successful, I guess, do you think the whole strategy of leaving the state was, in the sense that, it always looked like the end of this always seemed like it was pretty clear how it was going to go through, but it certainly elevated it. It became, at least for a little while, the focus of great national attention. Did you see benefits from that in terms of raising attention either nationally or just within the state and getting Texans engaged and fired up?
I do. I see this sort of as a pixelated picture where there's a bunch of dots. And once we get all the dots up on the canvas, the picture is going to emerge. And the picture that's emerging is of a centralizing of authority in the executive branch that is astounding and very un-American. So I do think we raised the alarm that this is a president who is willing to have a mid-decade redistricting entirely for his own benefit, not for the benefit of the country, not even for the benefit of his party. It's really for his benefit. That's really shocking. And so I do think that we raised that alarm. I think that we're raising that alarm with the government shutdown. I think we're raising that alarm with the president's willingness to use troops against civilian populations in cities that are controlled by the wrong party, in his opinion, particularly in cities that are controlled by individuals who may run against him in the next presidential cycle.
Right. Thinking about the redistricting, and obviously, as people like to point out, there are blue states that are clearly heavily gerrymandered too, and now apparently, we might get even more of that in response to what's happened in Texas. What do you think that does to sort of representative government when you have, one party taking advantage of, their kind of technical power to greatly exaggerate their representation. What does that do to people's sense of engagement with their own government and their sense that their voice is being heard?
When you redistrict a lot, you break up alliances, whether they're Republican or Democrat. And that breaking up of cohesion in communities drives down a sense of trust and faith and participation in the governmental process. So frequent redistricting is bad for democracy generally, no matter what party you're in. Also, redistricting that's heavily gerrymandered, it's when you're in a district that is so diverse that it is difficult to find your voice. It's difficult to even feel a sense of belonging among a majority of a district because, for instance, I'll take Congressional District 10 because I've been looking at it a lot. Congressional District 10 reaches from Lake Travis to Lake Livingston, from Central Texas to East Texas. It includes 3 universities, 2 of them flagship, but very, very different. University of Texas at Austin and A&M, College Station. And it also includes one of our most vibrant urban corridors in the Austin-San Antonio corridor, and then some of our most rural and vibrant agricultural lands. It's going to be interesting. It's an interesting district because it has pieces of the entire state. It has elements of the entire state of Texas in it. But as a congressional district, it is difficult. It is difficult for constituents living in CD10 to recognize each other when they are that different.
And they probably have neighbors or people, physically, culturally, whatever, much closer to them who are not in their district, right?
So no matter who is elected to a district that is that extruded, a large percentage of the people in that district will not feel represented by design. And that's not good for democracy. That's the reason why under the Civil Rights Act, there's a compactness test under court cases. You want a compact district so that the constituents actually recognize each other and each other's interests instead of not knowing each other.
So all that said, you are thinking of running for that district next year, District 10. I guess what is going into your consideration of that? And, obviously it is a district designed to be friendly to Republicans. How important do you think it is for there to be, good, active options, I guess, for voters in a district like that?
Whether it's Congressional District 10, any of the heavily gerrymandered districts in the Houston area, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, South Texas, where we saw some pretty considerable gerrymandering as well. Everyone deserves a choice in the election, and everyone deserves to have a sense of belonging in their representation. So I think it's important. I actually believe that, call me Pollyanna, but I actually think that Republicans and Democrats have a tremendous amount of common ground. When my father was in the House, he worked a lot with George Herbert Walker Bush. They were 2 different parties. They had very different philosophies of governing, but they found a tremendous amount of common ground. A good policy idea doesn't care what party it comes from. Good policy is good policy.
So to wrap up, I wanted to ask a question also having to do with a different part of your background, which is you have a theater background. You have a degree in theater from NYU, and I think you were part of the Atlantic Theater Company in New York.
Wow. Yeah. You did some research there.
Well, I can Google. But I wanted to ask this because my wife was a theater kid. She grew up doing regional theater, and she talks a lot about how much she took from that to sort of everything else she's done in her life in terms of being able to work with a diverse group of people, solve problems on the fly, and, the show must go on. So I'm just kind of curious, what from your theater background, if anything, do you draw on or has been useful in politics?
Oh, a tremendous amount, actually. Your wife is absolutely right in that regard. The basis of my belief that there's a tremendous amount of common ground between Republicans and Democrats comes straight from my theater training. Human beings have a desire to belong and to have their story told with fidelity, and to be recognized for what they need. And we are a species that works best in collaboration. We're not the fiercest animal in the jungle, and yet we've managed to hit the apex of the ladder because we work together, because we do recognize each other's humanity. I mean, a good play is one that's going to make you cry, whether you live in Texas or Philadelphia or Mozambique, because the human experience is a human experience.
Great. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up. So thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
This weekend, October 16th through 19th, brings the Leaf Global Arts Festival in western North Carolina, marking 30 years since it was founded in Black Mountain, a small artsy community outside of Asheville. It draws thousands of people to camp out for the weekend in a gorgeous mountain setting as the autumn colors are hitting their peak. Sadly, this may also be its final edition. LEAF is an acronym, or started as one. Its original name was the Lake Eden Arts Festival. It is run by the nonprofit LEAF Global Arts, which also offers global music and arts classes for school-age children. And it's more than just another music festival. It has long served as a gathering place for various strands of alternative Appalachian culture. It does have marquee headline acts. This year includes bassist Victor Wooten, hip-hop group Arrested Development, and singer-songwriter Valerie June. But it also offers a range of participatory activities, including dance classes, yoga, assorted musical jams, and a healing arts area. There was no Leaf Festival last year because Black Mountain was among the North Carolina communities devastated by flooding from Hurricane Helene. This year's festival will include remembrances of the flood and its victims. Leah Song of Rising Appalachia, our interview guest a few weeks ago, will perform at the closing ceremony. But it also comes as Leaf Global Arts is struggling like many festival organizers. Attendance at music festivals has fallen in recent years across the country, for reasons including rising costs and ticket prices, shifts in audience tastes and habits since the COVID pandemic, and frankly, money-grubbing commercialism, as many have come under the ownership of major corporations like Live Nation. The latter, at least, does not apply to Leaf. It is now offering tickets at a 30% discount to try to entice a larger crowd, and to make it easier for people to be part of what could be its last hurrah. Festival director Lee Mayer told WLOS News, quote, "We wanted to make sure that if this could possibly be the final festival, that people had an opportunity to come back if they wanted to." So, if you've always meant to go to Leaf, or you've been before and have meant to get back to it, this weekend is probably a good time to do it. You can find information at theleaf.org. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit media outlet, and you can find information about contributing to our efforts on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. If you do feel moved to make a donation, first of all, thank you. And second, make sure you make a note in the comments accompanying it that it is for the Progressive South. Thanks to Bark for our theme music, and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work here at Barbarian Production. And thanks to you for listening. Remember, you can call and say hey from wherever you are. Just leave us a message at 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. Tell us your first name, where you're calling from, and take up to a minute to let us know what's going on where you are. You can also write me at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org. We'll talk to you soon.